Confused and frightened, Isabella finds that the doctor and Alexander are tight-lipped about her bonding issue. What exactly is this bonding? And why is her body reacting so violently to it? Every subscription is the greatest support for us. Join us and uncover Isabella's secrets. 8. Isabella S.P.O.V. She should have healed by now. It's not healing up Alpha, the doctor mumbled as him, and the man stood in the corner of the hospital room talking in low voices that I was finding it hard to make out. I was sat up in a hospital bed, my tan legs dangling over the edge as I waited for whatever was about to come at me next. I had blacked out yesterday. All I can remember is waking up here about an hour ago when since all the doctor has done is poke and prod me, mostly my neck where the pain had subsided. He asked me some questions as did the man as soon as I woke up, but they were unanswered as I sealed my lips shut. I could tell they were starting to get frustrated with me when the doctor pulled the man into the corner of the room around 5 minutes ago. She's weak. Has she eat or drank anything? The doctor asked, similar to the questions he had shed me a while ago but didn't get an answer to. She won't. The most I got into her was a few glasses of water. Even that took a while, the man replied, his eyes scanning over to me every few seconds as if he was checking that I was still there. She needs to be put on a drip if this continues. For now you can't leave her. She's human. Her body is small as it is and can't handle the bond. Whenever you leave her she will have a lot of pain, the doctor ordered, staring up at the man. My head was swarming with my own questions ever since yesterday, and now this. What did he mean that I couldn't handle the bond? What bond? I had to be out on a drip. That wasn't happening again. I won't let them. The man was the first to take a step away from the doctor as he walked toward me, taking large strides as he placed his hands on either side of the bed I was sitting on. Isabella, what do you want to eat? He asked. However, he held a determined look in his eyes, as if he wasn't going to give up until I answered him. I stared into his now golden eyes, my mouth not moving to answer him, which only made his face lean closer into mine, causing me to shuffle back on the bed. I didn't want to be any closer to him than I needed to be, no matter what my heart was telling me. He's going to hurt me one way or another. Set the drip up, he barked at the doctor, who replied with a short nod. My eyes widened as his hand came up to my face, holding onto a long strand of my long brown hair, twiddling it around between his fingers. I reached my hand up, grabbing the piece of my hair back, pulling it behind my ears, out of his reach. I didn't want his filthy hands touching me more than they had to. Who knows where they have been? He let out a short laugh as his eyes flashed over to the doctor, who was now standing with a large needle in his hand as he prepared the drip that was going into me. My eyes focused onto the doctor, as I watched him move around the room, easily gathering what he needed quickly before I felt a warm hand being placed onto my chin, turning me to face him. Look at me, Isabella, he spoke, his voice coming out deep. I looked down at my hands. If none of this hadn't have happened to begin with, I'd probably be in grandma's right now, bored out of my mind, searching for service or writing with my brother. It didn't sound like an ideal summer, but it was sure more exciting than this. Ready, Alpha, the doctor spoke from beside me, making me jump to the other side of the bed before hitting the boards that were set up at the two edges of the bed, preventing people from falling out of the bed. The man looked at me once more, his eyes pleading as he held out his hand towards me, asking me to give him my wrist. Once last chance, will you eat? He asked once again, becoming impatient. I weighed out my options. Would I rather eat food from my mouth, no matter how hard I try not to, or have a needle stuck in my wrist for the next couple of days? It was already there and left a mark. I didn't want to speak to them, but I had to. I didn't want a needle in my wrist. What could I do? It's not like I could outrun two men. I wasn't fast at the best at times, and I knew I wouldn't make it a step without him grabbing onto me. I swallowed hard and moved my head back and forth, giving him a small nod in return. His eyes widened at my reply, as if wasn't expecting me to talk, before he turned to the doctor and motioned him out of the room. Finally he sighed in relief. You know, it wouldn't hurt to talk a little, he added as he stood up straight, taking his tall figure once again. He walked over to the chair that was placed beside the hospital bed and slumped himself down on it, closing his eyes for a brief second before reopening them. He looked as if he hasn't slept in a while. You know, don't have to be afraid, he sighed before turning to face me, his eyes staring into my own. I don't have to be afraid. How would he like to be kidnapped in the middle of the night, and then being told what you can and can't do without any explanation of what's happening? I mean, I know you're probably thinking that you're going to get hurt, but you won't, Isabella. I won't hurt you. I won't let anybody hurt you. I just need you to talk to me. Say anything. By the end of his sentence his voice had gone croaky as pain was laced through his blue eyes. I looked down at my hands, a pain soared through my chest, not doubled over excruciating pain, but I felt it run up and down my chest. What was happening? I've never felt like this before, and I feel like it's all I've been feeling for the past couple of days. My name's Alexander, he spoke up. His voice was back to normal now, deep and slightly raspy, causing my head to snap in his direction. Alexander. His name was Alexander. What type of name was Alexander? I felt a tingly feeling soar across my neck as he spoke. I always thought his name would be something like Alec Luca, something that reminds me of power, not Alexander. His eyes stayed on my brown ones as he spoke. He was trying to get me to speak by telling me things about him. I almost found myself giving into his trap and opened my mouth to speak but quickly shut it. He was doing something to me. My mind, it was clouded with thoughts and I couldn't think straight. He was doing this to me. I don't know what, but he knew what effect he was having on me. As his blue eyes widened as he leaned forward closer to me. I'm 20, he continued, his eyes not leaving mine once. I think I haven't even saw them move to blink yet. What was this guy superhuman? I pulled my hand to my head, which felt like it was screaming. It felt as though all the thoughts in my head were a hammer which was banging hard in my head, waiting to be let out. I've lived here all my life, he waffled on as I tried my best to black him out. I didn't like this feeling. My guard was beginning to decrease and I couldn't hold on any longer. I had to get him to stop. He needed to stop now. He stood up from his chair, walking over to me, taking the stance he had once again had a few minutes ago, leaning down and placing his hands either side of me as my feet dangled over the edge of the bed. I'm the Alpha, he began to explain. His face was getting closer and closer to mine. It was just inches away now and I could feel his hot breath fan my face. Stop, I cried out as I felt tears begin to form in the back of my head, spelling out as I covered my hands over my ears in an attempt to stop the thoughts that were swarming my head like bees. Just stop, I mumbled as I felt his large thumb come in contact with my face as he swiped away the tears that were falling from my eyes. I didn't pull back, however. I had just given up. 9 Isabella SP. Oh, she panicked. I had to do something. A familiar deep voice sounded. Giving her a large dose of penicillin wasn't your best move, Alpha. She's human, remember. A robotic-like voice replied, the voice sounding agitated. A loud growl erupted from only a few feet away from me. The growl radiated throughout. I could feel the floor shaking. I felt my eyes flutter open as my eyes roamed around the room trying to find the source of the noise. My head was pounding against my skull so hard it only made the growl seem louder. My eyes landed on the corner of the room when I spotted him. Alexander, his large tan hand wrapped around a neck. The doctor's neck as he held him above the ground without effort as the doctor kicked his legs furiously. Stop, I croaked out, my voice quiet. The doctor's face was turning a shade of purple. If Alexander didn't stop now, he would kill him. Immediately Alexander's face snapped towards me, his eyes widening as his grip loosened on the doctor's neck, and let go as the doctor fell to the ground in a crumple. He walked towards me, taking long strides until he stopped at the bed. His eyes was golden shining in the dim room before he reached his long tan hand out and placed it on my forehead. I pushed my head away from his hand, ignoring the sparks that erupted. If he was so easily able to do that to the doctor, who was also well built, why wouldn't he do it to me? I'm sorry, his deep voice broke the silence. I ignored his voice, and glanced over at the doctor that had now managed to get to his 2 feet as he straightened his tie and brushed himself up as if nothing had happened to him. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion as his eyes caught mine for a brief second. His eyes were laced with sadness and worry as he walked towards the door, quickly opening it before it shut with a bang. Do you feel okay? He asked, leaning his hands on the barriers of the hospital bed, his blue eyes staring into my own brown ones. Do I feel okay? He actually is asking me if I'm okay. Did he care if I was okay when he snatched me out of my bedroom in the middle of the night? Did he care if I was okay when he refuses to tell me what's going on, why I am here? You almost killed him, I mumbled, taking my eyes off his, staring at the white sheets that covered half of my body. I wasn't going to kill him. He overstepped his boundaries. He needed to know his place, his voice loud and stern. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Overstepped his boundaries. Even so, almost choking him to death doesn't justify his actions. What did this man even want with me? What if I ever overstepped my boundaries? Would he do the same to me? Listen, Isabella, you don't ask questions. I'll be nice, but trust me, don't you dare think you can speak to me like that for 1 minute. Even if you are a human. His voice rose as his face leant down closer towards my own. I swallowed hard. Even if I was a human, Was this guy immortal or something? Because I'm pretty aware that there is only such things as humans in this world. This guy must be delusional. Now you need your rest. The doctor will be back soon to check up on you. He spoke before returning to his full height and taking a few steps over to a chair that was close to the bed and pulling himself down into it. I turned my gaze away from his onto the white wall in front of me. Rest? How could I possibly rest when the guy next to me could possibly choke me to death in my sleep? She should be fine now to go. Bring her back in a few days for a checkup. And if she starts to panic again, don't give her penicillin, the doctor explained, looking towards the man who stood next to the bed with his arms crossed staring down at the doctor. I swung my legs back and forth slowly of the edge of the bed. It had been a couple of hours since the doctor had been here last. The man, Alexander, never left his position on the chair once. I keep my gaze on the white wall in front of me. My eyes were beginning to grow tired, but I never shut them once. I was scared to blink in case something set him off. Alexander nodded before his gaze shifted to me. His eyes softened slightly as he walked towards me. I pushed myself off the edge of the high hospital bed and landed my shaky sock-covered feet on the floor, but only for a second before I felt large hands wrap around the sides of my waist and pull my back into the position on the hospital bed. I wanted to pry the hands of me. I didn't like the tingly feeling it provided. Plus I didn't like the fact that they were his hands, Alexander's. His hands felt so careful and gentle against my waist compared to a few hours ago wrapped around tightly another man's neck. I felt myself shudder even think about it before his warm hands I could feel through the thin layer that the t-shirt left my waist. They were soon replaced around my back and under my knees as he easily hoisted me up from the bed. I opened my mouth to object. I didn't want him touching me. If his hands so easily wrapped around that man's neck, where else have they been? His blue eyes stared down at my own as he raised his eyebrows as if he was challenging me to object to him. I closed my mouth. His voice from earlier repeated over and over again in my head. Listen, Isabella. You don't ask questions. I'll be nice, but trust me, don't you dare think you can speak to me like that for 1 minute, even if you are a human. He took steps towards the door, before taking one hand that was wrapped around my back and opened the door, stepping out of it before shutting it behind him. He took a right, taking long strides down the corridor. We passed multiple black doors. The hall walls were covered with paintings of darkness, wolves, and forests. What does this man do with his spare time? Is he a hunter that hunts wolves? I found myself staring at the paintings until we reached a familiar black door. It was his room. His boot-covered feet stopped before he once again reached his long tan out and pulled open the door before he stepped into the dim ply-lit room. He took a few strides towards the bed in the corner of the room before gently placing me on it. I could barely make out where I was. I could only see his shadow as the only light source was from a small lamp that was placed on his wooden desk at the other end of the room. I heard a click and I squinted my eyes to try and figure out what he was doing. He had locked the door. I crawled up to the top of the bed, pulling my knees up to my chest. I didn't want to be near him. I felt a pang in my chest, causing me to suck in deeply as my hand flew up to the pains that had began to erupt from my chest. He was doing this to me. He was the one that was causing this pain. I felt the bed dip down slightly and I controlled my breath. If he knew that I was in pain, I would be back in that hospital room, back to square one. The pain subsided slightly until another one struck. This time only it felt like 2 times harder. I closed my eyes tight and let out a low groan. Barely audible, but as soon as the sound left my lips, I felt his hands on me. I attempted to push myself away from him as I felt his hot breath fan over my face. But why attempts didn't work out at the pain in my chest retuned harder. I gasped. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Isabella. What's wrong? Isabella, Alexander spoke, his voice coming out rushed and panicked as I felt his hands come in contact with my cheeks, holding them tight as I squinted my eyes in attempt to figure out where he was. I felt his hot hand leave my cheek before it collided with my hand that I had placed in my chest. His strong hand pried my own from my chest before he placed it on top. Immediately the pain subsided and I felt myself take a breath of relief. I don't know what is happening to me. Why can he only take the pain away? I heard him sigh in relief before he moved slightly, pulling me on top of him. His hand never leaving my chest as he wrapped a strong arm around my neck. His hand reaching up to wipe my wet cheeks. It's okay, he said before I felt him push my hair back out of my face, tucking it behind my ear. I didn't move. I lay still, each muscle in my body clenching as his strong arms wrapped around me. I couldn't move. I felt like I was frozen in one spot. This is going to be a long night. 10. Isabella SPOV. I need to train the wolves at Alexander. I've missed enough sessions but I can't leave her alone yet. She's not healed. Alexander's voice broke through the silence of the room. My eyes snapped to the other side of the room where he was standing, a phone pressed against his ear as he stood facing the wall. She's bloody scared enough I can't bring her out there. His voice snapped into the phone. I stared at his bare tan back. Each muscle was defined and clenched as his hand that was clamped around the phone was about to break it into pieces. He had a large structure. His body resembled a masterpiece that didn't have any flaws. I felt my heart rate speed up slightly as he turned his head slightly around, his eyes connecting with Mike for a brief second before he turned around to face the wall. I snapped my gaze to my joined hands resting on my lap. I felt like I was ready to get closer to him. I didn't like the feeling he provided. The sparks were weird and uneasy. Last night I don't know what happened to me. All I know, it's never going to happen again. I let my wall I've been building get knocked down. I've shown I'm vulnerable. I'll train them in the gym today. Then see how we will get on from there. His voice snapped me out of my daze before he slammed the phone down on the wooden desk. I think I heard a crack, causing me to flinch slightly. He turned around to face me, his eyes scanning my body that was covered in one of his large t-shirts before his eyes flickered to his wardrobe door, and me made his way over towards it. He disappeared for a few seconds before he reemerged wearing a black t-shirt and a few pieces of clothes in his hand. He walked over to the bed, placing the clothes beside me. It consisted of a black t-shirt and a pair of gray joggers. I stared at the clothes, then shifted my gaze up to him. If he thought I was going to change here, of all places, he was wrong. It's the smallest I've got. I'll get you sorted later, he responded, his arms folded over one another. He turned his back towards me, making his way towards the bathroom before closing the door slightly but not fully closed. I sat in the bed. I wasn't going to change with him possibly able to walk in on me. Now's your chance, he called from the bathroom. I stared at the clothes beside me. If I don't get changed now within the next few minutes, he was going to come out and make me get changed anyway. I sighed, standing up from my position on the bed, and quickly pulling the large t-shirt from my small body before quickly grabbing the other one and placing it on me. It hung the same way as the other one, loosely, that it was falling from my shoulders. I quickly pulled on the jogging botrichards only for them to fall straight back down once they were up. I sighed as Alexander emerged from the bathroom and my hand shot down to pull the hem of the jogging botrichards up. He raised his eyebrow at me, the sides of his mouth turning up before he took a few steps towards me, reaching his hands out and grabbing the strings that were connected to the trousers. He pulled them tightly in an attempt to make them stay attached to my waist, which turned out to be working as the second time they didn't fall. His eyes trailed up to meet my own as his hands snaked around my waist. I quickly pushed my hands on top of his, pushing them off. I didn't want him to touch me. A flicker of gold passed through his eyes, his hands only clamped on tighter to my waist as he pulled me against him. Listen, Isabella, we're going down to another floor. There's going to be males, a lot of them. You're going to stay with me and keep your eyes on the ground at all times, and your hand is to never leave mine, he ordered. I felt my heart speed up as his hand reached up to tuck a piece of my brown hair behind my ear. I turned my head to face the wall. Just because of last night didn't mean that he could act this way towards me. I felt the heat of his body leave as he took a step back and extended his hand towards me. I looked at it before I felt his tan hand reach and grab my much smaller hand. Sparks erupted, which made me want to pull away. He shot me a glance before he directed me in the direction of the wooden door, the way out. We entered the hallway and he took long strides towards the end. I was practically jogging in an attempt to catch up to him. His legs were so long compared to my own. His steps were like leaps. His hand reached out and pressed the elevator button. His right hand wrapped around mine, tightly so that my hand wasn't able to slip through his grasp. He stepped into the elevator, me following behind him, before his hand reached out and pressed the number 2. Is this when he finally decided to get rid of me? Is this when he was actually going to kill me for real this time? Remember what I told you? His deep voice snapped me out of my daze, causing me to look up at him, only to find he was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. The elevator came to a halt before he rushed out of it quickly. His hand squeezed tighter onto mine as if it was a clamp that was physically clamped there. I attempted to pull my now sore hand back, but he responded by flashing a glance in my direction. His eyes showing flickers of gold, however his grip loosened slightly. Not enough for my hand to slip out, but enough for my hand now to hurt. He stopped in front of a clear door before reaching his long fingers and punching a code in order to get into the room. I peered through the door slightly to see a large room filled with gym equipment. Treadmills, weights, punching bags, pulling machines and cycling machines filled the room along with what seemed like dozens of men. My eyes widened before we entered the room, causing the noise to become silent as all the men's eyes meet Alexander's and their heads slightly bowed down. My eyes scanned the men that were currently standing in the room. There was around 40 of them, each wearing a pair of black shorts with most of them shirtless, only a few with tank tops on. They all had the same symbol on their left shoulder. Was this some type of gang or something? Get warmed up. We're staring in 10. Alexander's voice cut through the silence of the room. The men nodded their head and proceeded to do what they were told in silence. It shocked me, the change of tone in Alexander's voice. I thought he was being cold in the elevator. His voice came out as cold as ice. I felt my arm being tugged in a direction, causing my head to snap up to Alexander's, only for him to be already walking me over to other side of the room. My head snapped to glance at the other men once again, only to be met with all of their curious eyes. I felt my hand being released and large hands being placed on my shoulders, before I felt my back being pressed up against the wall, causing me to flinch. Do you not listen to me? Alexander's voice growled out. I tilted my head up slightly to see that his eyes had now almost transformed into a golden color. And no blue was visible anymore, just speaks of gold and black. His warm hands, which I could feel through the thin layer of his t-shirt, pressed harder on my shoulders, causing me to wince. Just stay here and sit, and I mean it, Alexander warned before turning his back on me. I attempted to peek around his large shoulder but was constantly blocked. It was as if he was able to predict everything. I slid down the wall and landed with a soft thud on the floor and squinted my eyes in an attempt to see between his legs. Maybe one of these men could see that he is holding me captive. Who am I kidding? The doctor and nurse knew, but they did it so anything about it. I don't know why, but everyone seemed scared of Alexander. Even the men with big muscles, however not as big as Alexander's, bowed down to him. Did he have some sort of spell or something on them? I mean, they have a pretty good reason to be scared of him. He's big and intimidating. But I'm sure if all of them rebelled against him, they could win. I moved my head slightly to the side, peeking out to see that the men were using the different equipment. Men were pulling weights that looked pled as if they weighed double the amount of the people lifting them. What were these guys made of? Some steel or robotic material? One of the men closest to me caught my eye. He was one of the larger men in the room. He was on the ground doing push-ups. He had been doing them for a few minutes now, and it didn't seem like it affected him. There was no sweat building up or nothing. In the middle, Alexander's voice ordered loud and cold as he shifted his footing, causing me to flick back. All the men immediately dropped what they were doing, making their way up to Alexander, leaving a small gap and forming a semicircle around them. First cardio and later we will go out to the forest. 1,000 push-ups every single one of you now. Alexander's voice sounded like a knife cutting through butter. My eyes traveled among the group of men who instantly dropped to the ground doing what they were told. The same man from the push-ups caught my eye once again as his eyes were a shade of brown. He looked familiar, I don't know why. But I've seen him before. I heard Alexander clear his throat, causing me to turn my head and look at him to find that he was looking straight at me. His golden eyes stared at my brown ones, squinting before he snapped his gaze over the crowd of men and took a step away from me. I watched his large body take long strides through the men who continued doing push-ups, their eyes fixed on the ground, not meeting his eyes, before he stopped, his boots banging loudly of the ground. Kent, his voice claimed before his hand reached down and grabbed the man's neck, pulling him to his feet. With no struggle, the man groaned out his hand, reaching up to grab Alexander's, but his attempts didn't work. My eyes widened, however. The rest of the men in the room continued doing their push-ups, their eyes apart from a few, not traveling up to witness the scene that was being played out in front of them. The man, who I felt like I knew, was now pressed against the wall for some unknown reason. His brown eyes, now traced with fear, meet with mine once again, causing Alexander to release him against the wall before slamming him into it once again, causing me to flinch and let out a gasp. Do you like looking at my mate? Alexander growled out, his face becoming closer to the man's I now knew as Kent. It felt as if the doctor scene was playing out once again. However, this time I didn't think it was stopping. What's a mate? What did Kent do to his mate? Who was his mate? Kent swallowed hard, his face turning a shade of blue as Alexander's grips tightened around his neck, his knuckle beginning to turn white. No, Alpha. Kent's voice struggled out, his voice becoming raspy. My eyes widened as I felt hard beating in my chest. If I didn't intervene, he wouldn't stop choking him, but if I did, it could possibly be me in that wall now. Questions swarmed around in my head trying to comprehend the situation. What was an alpha? Why did everyone here call Alexander Alpha? Kent's hand shot up to Alexander's arm that was holding him up, attempting to pry his hands away from his neck, but Alexander's muscular arm didn't budge after Kent let out a few groans, throwing his head back. If he didn't stop now, it wasn't going to end like the doctor one. Stop it, I mumbled out quiet, the words coming out before I could rethink what I had just done. But it came out loud compared to the almost silent room, the only noise from the heavily panting Kent that was pinned up against the wall. All heads in the room snapped towards me. The men stopped doing push-ups and their eyes left the ground, staring at me with wide eyes. But the only eyes that stood out were Alexander's gold ones, who were staring coldly at me. 11 Isabella SP.OV. His grip loosened on the man's neck until it had unwrapped completely, and the man had fallen to the ground, his hands reaching up to his own neck as he breathed heavily. The room was silent apart from the heavy breathing. I could feel eyes burning into the side of my head, but my eyes were focused on a pair of gold ones that were staring through me. His boot-covered feet loudly chirped on the ground as he began taking long strides towards me. Why did I have to open my mouth? I didn't know that boy, he's probably just like Alexander, a kidnapper. My eyes left his as my eyes desperately searched those in the crowd who stared blankly at Alexander. None of them made an attempt to move or to stop him, they remained glued to the ground. I felt his large warm hand grip onto my arm tightly, causing my head to snap up towards his. His face bent down so that it was now at level with mine. I could feel his heavy breaths fan my face as his body radiated warmth towards me. I told you not to speak, his voice calmly whispered into my ear, his lips grazing it slightly. I turned my head to the side. I didn't want to look at him. Every time I did, it only reminded me of the situation I was in. The way I was never going to see my family again. How stupid I was to think I was safe. Look at me, he growled, his other hand reaching up to grab my jaw, holding it tightly, twisting it so that I had no other choice than to face him. I bit my lip as I felt my eyes become stingy. This was probably the end. I had annoyed him too many times. He was going to get fed up and just get rid of me. I knew this would turn out like this, but I thought it would be much later. I didn't know that at 17 I would die. I haven't even left school yet. I'll never get married or have children. The other men in the room weren't making a sound. I couldn't see them past Alexander's shoulders, but my guess was they were watching the display that was taking place in front of them. Get out, he spoke loudly, his eyes not leaving mine as I closed mine tightly. Maybe if I try hard enough I will make myself believe I'm not in this situation. I'm not about to be killed, that I'm back home in England moaning about the bad weather. Footsteps could be heard and a few seconds later the door slammed shut. That's it, I'm alone with him now. There's no one to protect me from him. No one to help me escape from this monster. Open your eyes, he ordered. I stood still, not moving. He wasn't going to get what he wanted. If he was going to kill me, it would be better sooner than later. When can you see that I'm not going to hurt you? His voice raised slightly as his hot breath fanned my cheek. I felt a tingle shoot through the side of my cheek where I could feel his hand gently rub over. I turned my face the other way, my eyes still shut. I couldn't stand his hand touching me when I know what they have done before to other people. Why do you keep ignoring the feelings? They are only going to get stronger, Isabella. I can't have you acting like this now. Especially not in front of my men, he sighed as his hand trailed down to my hair, pulling on the strands slightly as he wrapped them around his large hand. I squeezed my eyes tighter, my breathing was becoming heavier. I didn't like how he could do anything he wanted to me now. Before I could react, I felt his large hand push my face in a straight position once again, and I felt his lips come in contact with my own. Sharp tingles spread throughout my lips, traveling through my whole body, spreading as if it were caught on fire. The tingles didn't stop for a second as I felt his soft lips move against mine. My eyes shot open after a few seconds before I could realize what he was doing. I quickly turned my head, raising my hands against his chest, pushing only for his arms to wrap tighter around my waist. The tingles calmed down when his lips left my own. Only a tingling sensation left. My head began to spin when the events replayed in my head. I had just kissed him, he had kissed me. A murderer, kidnapper, and who knows what else. I shut my eyes tightly as if I was attempting to block out what had just happened. My Richardack felt queasy, like I was going to be sick from what just happened. Isabella. Shit, Alexander's voice felt as if it was echoing inside my pounding head as I tried to block him out. Please open your eyes, Alexander pleaded. For the first time, he wasn't forcing me to do something. He sounded vulnerable. I took a deep breath before opening my eyes to come face to face with his chest covered in a black t-shirt before my eyes traveled up to meet his own gold ones. His face was strained slightly as his eyebrows were deeply furrowed as if he was holding himself back from something. "You don't know how hard that was to stop," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough so that I could hear. The heat from his body radiated to my own, making me aware that my small structure was pressed against his large one. "Get away from me," I managed to chalk out as I swallowed hard. I was his prisoner. He had no right to do that to me. Who knows what else he would try to do. His hands loosened on my hips, but not enough for me to wriggle my way out, but enough for me to step back and be able to take deep breaths again without feeling as if he was trapping me. "Isabella," he sighed, his hand reaching up to press against my cheek only for me to flinch away. My trust for him wasn't very strong to begin with. Well, it was never there to start with, but now I know that this man is dangerous. It was going to happen one way or another. He stated, his hands leaving contact with my waist altogether as he folded his arms over one another. I looked up into his eyes. The vulnerability I had previously saw in his eyes were gone, left with anger. My eyebrows furrowed at what he said. What did he mean it was going to happen one way or another? I would never kiss him. He caught me off guard, and as long as I'm here I will never let him lay another finger on me. "You feel the sparks?" "I know you do. I can tell every time I come near you or touch you." "You flinch," he claimed, taking a step towards me. I felt my heartbeat becoming faster in my chest. How did he know I felt sparks? Did he feel sparks too? What was he doing to me? Partly when he comes near me or touches me I flinch is because of the sparks. I hate the way they make me feel. As if what Alexander is doing is alright, but also mostly out of fear. "You're going to accept this one day, Isabella. Just stop fighting and make it easier on yourself," he continued, taking another step forward. By now our bodies were touching once again. I wanted to move backwards, but I felt as if I had nowhere to go, as if my feet were rooted to the ground, as if he had me trapped here, unable to get away from him. I was never going to accept him. The quicker I get out of here, the more I can forget about this place, like it was all just one big nightmare that I don't have to worry about again. "Come on, Isabella, start yelling. I know that everything you have bottled up is just going to explode. Speak to me," he teased. I took deep breaths. He wanted me to have an outburst. He wanted to win this sick game that he was playing. I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to let him win this game I never wanted to participate in. "Lost for words, Isabella. You weren't a few minutes ago when you spoke in front of my men," he continued as a small smirk tested along his face as he enjoyed the torment on which he was putting me through. "Say something. I know you want to," he spoke. I felt tears begin to prick at the side of my eyes. He was winning. He was getting to me, and I was stupid enough to let him. I should know by now he wasn't going to lose. He was always going to get what he wanted. "I hate you," I cried out as his smirk began to fade from his face when he realized that when he finally won and got what he wanted, it wasn't something that he was pleased to hear. 12 Isabella S.P.O.V. I lay still, breathing in heavily as if I was still asleep as I smelt Alexander's woodsy masculine steel hover above me. I didn't want him to know I was awake. I wanted to lay in his bed all day without him bothering me. The events from yesterday replayed in my head repeatedly as if it happened a few seconds ago. I could still feel the feeling of his soft lips against my own no matter how much times I scrubbed them in the bathroom. "I know you're awake, Isabella." Alexander's voice interrupted the silence in the bedroom. I had been awake all night. My eyes were sore from staring at the wall all night. Alexander had gotten up around an hour ago and I heard him at his desk, but apart from that I hadn't moved an inch. I kept my eyes closed. I had hoped that somehow he would realize I didn't want to get up and would leave me alone. But it was evil controlling Alexander. He was never going to leave me alone. "Isabella the first, don't mind dragging you out of bed, but don't test my patience. I can only be nice for so long," he sighed. His voice sounded strained yet stern, as if he was about to give up fighting with me. I opened my eyes, slightly blinking to readjust to the bright light that was now provided to see that Alexander was a little taller than eye level as he was bent down on his honkers. I pushed myself into a sitting position, edging away from the edge of the bed slightly, as if I was trying to create as much space between us as possible. I shivered slightly as the cold air hit my bare arms. The rooms I am in are always cold. It's as if there is no heating. But it doesn't seem to affect Alexander. He's always shirtless and wearing boxers, yet his body still radiates heat. "Come on," Alexander sighed, returning to a standing position and taking his full height once again, towering over me as he held out his long tan hand. I looked at his hand. I wasn't going to touch it. Even being near him made me feel sick, as if I was going to scrub myself in bleach to get the tingly feeling sensation away. I swung my feet over the edge of the bed and pulled myself to a standing position. My whole body felt exhausted. I hadn't been sleeping much since I got here and it was taking a toll on me. I ignored Alexander's outstretched hand, earning him to shake his head at me, clenching his jaw slightly before making his way over to his wardrobe, re-emerging a few seconds later holding out a cotton jumper for me. "Put this on," he ordered as he held the jumper in his tan fingers. I stared at the jumper. I had only a thin t-shirt belonging to him on along with a pair of boxers. If I didn't take this jumper I would freeze. "I'm not going to tell you again," he sighed in frustration, taking a step towards me. I reached out my hand, taking a hold of the large jumper before pulling it over my head, letting it fall down to my knees. I breathed in, crinkling my nose at the masculine wood smell that radiated of the jumper. It smelled of Alexander. Alexander made his way to the door that led into the hallway. Every time I have walked through that door and left this room, I always end up doing something wrong. I slowly followed behind him, keeping a distance between us as he held open the bedroom door, entering the long hallway. The hallway was lit up by chandeliers that was placed every so often on the wall. Alexander began taking long strides down the hall before he stopped at a wooden door. He opened it, looking around at me, raising his eyebrows as I quickly caught up to him. The last time I was in this hallway by myself is when I was looking for a way out of here. I entered the room behind Alexander, his massive shoulders blocking my view from anything before he stepped to the side, and my eyes scanned around the room to see a large white kitchen. It was littered with cupboards, fridges, dishes pulled up in the sink, and to the right a large dining table with several chairs lined up. My eyes scanned the room, landing on the light source. A wall that was replaced with a massive window covered an entire wall in the kitchen, letting natural light stream in. I passed Alexander, who had already made his way over to the kitchen, and made my way over to the window. This is the first time I have felt like I've been outside in days. My eyes scanned over the endless trees. It was a forest surrounding me. "Isabella," he called from the other side of the room, causing me to snap my head around in his direction. He stood covered in a hoodie along with a pair of basketball shorts behind the bench. If you were to see him on the street, you would think he was a normal guy in his 20s going on nights out, partying what normal guys that age do. No, he was made up of pure evilness. He tortured people for his own fun, kidnapped girls without a second thought. I felt bubbles in my chest as I stared at him, furrowing my eyebrows at him. I've never felt this much hate for one person. Even when my older brother Kyle destroyed my doll when I was 7, I remember not talking to him for a day or so until he had gotten me a new one. I turned my gaze around to the window again, gazing over the trees, watching as they moved with the wind. I had to hold myself back. I knew I would say something that I would regret. "Don't ignore me," he snapped, his voice becoming closer to where I was standing as I heard his footsteps become closer. I turned my body around to see that he was now only a few steps away from me. His face had now turned from a tan color to a red color. He was angry, but I wasn't surprised. When is he never angry? "Stop it," I spat at him, taking a step backwards, letting my back hit against the cool glass behind me. "Stop what?" "Isabella?" He questioned, his voice one considerably stern and louder as he stood steps closer to me but got cut off. "Don't say that. Don't say my name. I can't stand being near you. You make me sick," I exclaimed, covering my face with my hands. "You don't mean that." "I know you don't," he laughed. He was laughing at me. He thought this was some sort of a twisted, sick, weird joke. I pulled my hands from my face to find him leaning against the dining room table, his position slumping over slightly, his hood shielding me from looking into his eyes. "You don't hate me, you only think you do. You hate what you thought I did," he continued, his laugh dying out. "I hate what I thought he did. He kidnapped me and I couldn't stand the sight of him because of it." "You kidnapped me, how could I not hate you?" I mumbled, earning a chuckle from Alexander. His laugh could have drifted me off to sleep. I hated it. "I didn't kidnap you," Alexander chuckled, his chest bouncing up and down as his bright smile looked at my face, falling when he saw that I was serious. "Do you take girls from their bedroom windows all the time then?" "Because the last time I checked, taking a girl from her window was against the law," I stated. He wasn't taking me seriously. He thought all of this was a joke, that ruining my life was just one big joke. I hated him. "I do if she's mine, and I wouldn't have to come to your bedroom window if you didn't run away. Did you think for a second that you had got away from me?" "If I had have wanted to catch you in the forest, I would have. I wanted to see how things panned out," he replied. "Get used to it. This is all you're going to be seeing for your future." He continued, turning his back around and heading towards the kitchen. This was it. He was right. I was never getting out of here. I will be stuck here no matter if I try to run away. 13 Isabella SP. "Oh. The bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, that's your zone." You don't leave your zone without me, got it? Alexander explained, his eyes looking back to the paper that was sprawled out over his desk. My eyes widened as I quickly moved from my position on the large bed that I had been laying on for what felt like centuries, staring up at the white ceiling for hours until I forgot where I was. I pulled the large shirt lower down on my body as the cool air hit my legs before I carried myself over to the door that led out to the hall, the door that a few days ago I wasn't allowed to be near. I don't know what changed his mind. Was the monster actually feeling sorry for me? Or was he tired of me staying in the same spot for most of the day? I mean it, you stay within the space or you'll be back in this bedroom, his voice warned. I wasn't going to run. I knew as soon as I took off down that hallway within seconds I would just be back where I started. I sighed, pulling open the large door, stepping out before shutting it behind me. It had been the first time I had been alone since I've been here. For the first time I felt like no one was watching over me, although I wouldn't be surprised if there was. I turned my gaze to my right, taking a few steps and pulling open a similar dark wooden door as the bedroom, opening up to reveal the living room. It was only my second time being here. The first time I had just looked after Alexander had showed me the kitchen. I stepped in, letting the door shut behind me as my eyes scanned over the 3 rows of large sofas. They were black leather, each sofa lined up behind each other, all facing a large TV that hung on the wall. The living room gave of a cinema vibe as my gaze flickered over to the pool table that was laid out behind all other sofas, which gave the room a less of a serious vibe. I made my way over to the closet sofa. Picking up a remote with multiple buttons, I sighed, falling back onto the sofa before studying the remote. There was no way I could figure out how to work this thing by myself. I pushed myself off the sofa and towards the black curtains that were pulled over what I'm guessing is a window. I reached my hand out, pulling back the black curtain, only to see a portion of a large window. The shutters were pulled shut with a small lock in the middle. It's like he knew every move I was going to take. I took a deep breath, pulling open the bedroom door. It had only been a half an hour, but without the TV I was even more bored out of my mind. I thought I would love the alone time, but I didn't know what to do. Miss me already? Alexander's voice sounded as my eyes gazed around the room to find him leaning against his wardrobe door, a black shirt in his hand, and a small smirk placed on his face. I let my eyes trail down from his face to see that his body had droplets of water. He must have only been out of the shower. Water droplets dripped from his abs that covered his Richardac that were almost perfectly as chiseled as his jawline. I thought you would be jumping at any chance to get away from me, Alexander stated, causing my head to snap up to see his. The remote's hard to figure out, I mumbled, turning around and falling onto the bed. If it was up to me I would be out of this house and back to the airport. Come on, he sighed. I quickly sat up, pushing myself off the bed once more to find him standing at the bedroom door with raised eyebrows. You could have called me sooner, he stated, his arms folded over one another as he leaned against the doorframe before pulling the handle and pushing the door open. I slowly slid off the bed, making my way towards his large frame. Why was he actually talking to me instead of telling me what to do? Was he feeling sorry for me or something? He then moved to walk in front of me, taking a few steps and pulling open the living room door. He made his way into the room, striding over to the remote which lay on the side of the sofa, and collapsing lazily down, taking the remote in his large hands. You can come closer, I don't bite. Well, not that hard, Alexander mumbled. I'm all right here, I replied, leaning my back against the hard wall, folding my hands over my chest. If you want to know how to work the remote, I suggest you get closer, he sighed, rolling his eyes at me before setting his gaze on the large flat screen in front of him. I'm not going to repeat myself, he added after a few seconds of silence, his eyes not leaving the TV to meet mine. If I did find out how to work the TV, it would give me something to do during my day, instead of being cooped up in the bedroom, which seemed as if it was getting smaller and smaller every day I was in it. I slowly reached my hands down to push the shirt that covered my body, which had risen up slightly down, before making my way over to the sofa, sitting down, leaving a large gap in between us. I heard him let out a heavy sigh as he leaned into the gap, making the distance between us smaller as he placed the remote in front of him. I looked up from the remote to his face. Looking at him, you would think he was a normal young guy, maybe attending college. He didn't look evil. He looked like the typical bad boy in a movie. A perfectly toned body as long with a sculpted face. Not a guy who kidnapped a girl. Okay, to turn it on, press the red button, he informed me, his eyes trailing up to find that I wasn't looking at the remote. My gaze quickly snapped to the black remote sitting on the sofa in front of me. Once you turn the remote on, these 2 buttons change the channel, he continued. I could tell he was still looking at me, but I continued to keep my gaze fixed on the remote. Press the arrow buttons to adjust the volume. And you said he finished his hand reaching out and once again grabbing the remote and holding it out to me. Now repeat those steps he ordered. I raised my hand taking the remote out of his tan ones, careful not to touch his skin. I hated the feeling of the sparks. I reached over the remote, pressing down on the red button, causing a few moments later the large TV to loudly play a small tune before it came to life, a white screen brightening up the dark room. I looked at the screen and then back at the remote. Everything else he told me went through one ear and out the other. I remembered how to adjust the volume, but I forgot how to change the channel. I forgot, I mumbled. His arm reached out, taking the remote from my hands. His hand brushing against mine, igniting faint sparks, causing me to yank my hand away, the remote falling to the floor. What happened? Are you okay? He rushed out, reaching his hand out once again to grab mine, pulling it towards him, as if he was inspecting to see if any damage had been done. It's all right, I sighed, pulling my hand back. Do I scare you that much that you flinch every when I come near you? Your heart rate spreads up anytime I speak. Can't you get into that brain of yours that I'm starting to think doesn't exist, that I'm not going to hurt you? You've been here for a while. Don't you think if I wanted to hurt you I already would have? I'll agree not to pull anything on you if you stop trying to move away from me, Alexander rants, his voice raising slightly as he moves to a forward position on the sofa, his eyes looking everywhere but mine. Agreed. Friends, he finally turns to me, reaching out his arm towards me. I looked to his hand. He wanted to be friends. After weeks of ordering me what to do, telling me what I can and can't do, trying to kiss me, and now he wants to be friends. Before I could stop myself, I reached my hand up, moving it join with his. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel, and let us know you want to continue following Isabella's adventure.